In 1985, the national government announced the deregulation of financial services, called the Big Bang, and was to open the City of London to competition from companies and financial institutions from around the whole world. That meant that the city had to be greatly replanned to be able to accommodate all of the extra firms that would want to be there. And so we set about producing new planning policies for this 1 square mile, this business district of London, a district which not only was the centre of business for London, but also has a history of 2,000 years. We obviously had to protect the best of that heritage. However, the plan also had to allow for increased office floor space. Up until the year 2000, we managed to accommodate that growth through building on underused land which had previously been in use for rail freight or had been used for printing newspapers, industries and activities that had moved away from the city. That land was available for creating new office campuses with buildings of up to 10 stories in height. We called them ground scrapers. So our ground scrapers were appearing, but at around the time of the millennium, we discovered that we still didn't have enough space, and the only option, the last resort, was to build skyscrapers. And I think it's very important to realise that skyscrapers are not good things for themselves, that you should only ever build skyscrapers if there's no other alternative. And so it was decided to construct a cluster of office towers in the eastern part of the city, away from all of the protected views of St Paul's Cathedral, because of its important role on the skyline of the city, and in a place where there were 20 stations and 7 underground lines within walking distance. So very accessible for public transport. When I first saw the model of this building with its sloping face and series of fins on that southern elevation, I looked at it and I thought of Lord Rogers' wife, Ruth Rogers, who runs a very fine Italian restaurant in Hammersmith called River Cafe. And I could imagine her using that to grate the parmesan onto the pasta. And I said, it looks like a cheese grater. Well, that nickname stuck. After the cheese grater, we got a walkie-talkie, or as you say in French, a talkie-walkie. And from then on, we've gone on to have more interesting and unusual shapes on the city skyline. But the important thing is not so much the shape, the design, or even the impact on the skyline. What is important is the use of these buildings. Now, back in the 1990s, Frankfort proposed that it should be the European capital of finance. And they came out with a very good plan, a plan to build skyscrapers. They planned them, they built them, and Frankfort didn't change. We used to joke before the 1990s that Frankfort was a quiet market town, that after the 1990s it was a quiet market town with skyscrapers. The one thing they didn't think about was the nightlife. So as far as I could see, the best mixture of uses for London's business district was to combine business with leisure. After all, when the offices are open, the bars and the clubs are closed, and when the bars and the clubs open, the offices are closed. So neither disturbs the other, but they do complement each other. Because it tends to be the city that employs the 20 and 30-somethings that come to London from around the world. And those people come to London because London is the best party on the planet. And it's interesting to note that the largest bank in Frankfurt, Deutsche Bank, actually does its trading and activity in London rather than in Frankfurt. The idea that London is going to close down as an international centre following Brexit is something I can't conceive of. London cannot run without the huge numbers of French people who work here. When Boris Johnson was mayor of London, he used to joke that by his calculations on the number of young French people living in London, London was now the 6th largest city in France. I'm sure there's some truth in that. Now, that French community in West London is an integral part of London's economy. Very important. And very important not only for London's benefit, but bridging London and Paris, from Britain into France, and bringing two cultures closer together. That is all good. But I do believe that European regulation has tended to be too inward-looking, too concerned about what's going on within the boundaries of Europe and not concerned enough about what is happening outside. Well, we've started to nickname the next generation, probably the generation that are watching this video, as Generation Rent. Now, I think that's a very good thing. I think that means you guys have woken up to the sensible option that there are many things in life you don't need to own. You simply want them to use. I no longer own my iPhone. I have it on a plan where I will hand it back at the end of 12 months and get the next one. I'm effectively renting it. People rarely own a bike in London because bikes are available to rent. The same with housing. Why not rent it? In Germany, people have a lot more money to spend on entertainment, leisure and purchasing goods. Why? Because they spend a lot less on accommodation. Because there's a good supply of rented accommodation. And when you rent that accommodation, those people have security of tenure. So in London, what we need to do is to build more rented housing that's professionally managed, not owned and left by amateurs who own a few properties, but by big development companies, is maintained properly, rent it out at fair rents, and provide security of tenure so that as long as you pay your rent, you have a home. Until we change to that, London is going to have a continuing crisis of housing. So it does sadden me to see parts of London, which I believe are out of control at the moment, where planning policy is not allowed to intervene to prevent the wrong kind of development and to ensure that our land, which is a limited resource, a scarce resource, is used wisely. British business culture began in and still gravitates to a considerable degree around the English pub. In France, it's the cafe. Now, in the cafe, you're sitting with your friends and you hear your friends gossip. Well, that's okay, but you probably know most of it and you can predict the rest of it because you know your friends so well. There's a very interesting conversation going on at the next table. But because I'm seated at the table with my friends, I can't quite hear what they're saying, but I really wish I could. Now that's the gossip I want. But in a cafe, it's not designed to allow me to overhear what others are saying. An English pub, you go in with your friends, you generally drink standing up rather than sitting down, and you can hear an interesting conversation going on behind you. Well, you can easily move just a few feet towards the other conversation so that you're close enough to hear what the people behind you are saying. After a few beers, you may forget which group you're with anyway, and you may find you're part of the other group. It's very flexible. It's a great place to exchange gossip. So my suggestion is, if you want to make La Défense a success, you need to open a pub.